Hello, Faith United Youth and others. Welcome to our very first session on the book of James. Now, we are just coming off of a very long study on what it means to be rooted, have your identity rooted in God. And we looked at all kinds of things. And these things are very foundational. You know, the fact that we're loved by God, we're forgiven, we are treasured by Him, how He views us. And it is so important for us to understand these concepts and these things before we delve into other things. So today we're going to be looking at the book of James, and for the next several weeks through November and the very beginning of December, we'll look at that too. And today we're going to start with a little bit of context. So before I even get into James 1, we're going to kind of look at some of the background and some different things, you know, why James wrote it, who he was writing to, who is James, you know, besides my husband. He did not write it. So I want to start with a story that I'm going to read from my commentary on James. I spoke about commentaries before, and I love them because they do the work for you. You know, if you're like, I wonder about the background of this, all you have to do is pick up a commentary and it says everything for you. So, and these commentaries that I use, they are an application commentary, which means that it helps you to apply what is in the Word to your life, which is really the ultimate goal. You know, if we just study the Bible just to have knowledge and information, like, cool, but that doesn't really change our hearts, and that doesn't get us closer to God, which is our ultimate goal, right? So, I want to start with reading a little story, and I'll talk about it a little bit afterwards, but it's kind of interesting. So this is what it says. Get cozy, get some hot chocolate if you want. It's gonna take 2 minutes, so anyways. All right, on January 1st, 1990, some of you might remember that, some of you might not. I don't know, I was 10, so. President Václav Havel of Czechoslovakia addressed his nation. It had been a few weeks since his country peaceably ousted the communist totalitarian government that held power for 40 years. Only 2 days before, Havel had been elected president by a parliament still dominated by communists. Havel said, "We live in a contaminated moral environment. We learn not to believe in anything, to ignore each other, to care only for ourselves. Concepts such as love, friendship, compassion, humility, and forgiveness lost their depth and dimensions. And for many of us, they came to represent only psychological peculiarities, or to resemble long-lost greetings from ancient times. When I talk about contaminated moral atmosphere, I'm talking about all of us. Why do I say this? It would be quite unreasonable to understand the sad legacy of the last 40 years as something alien, something bequeathed to us by some distant relative. On the contrary, we must accept this legacy as a sin we committed against ourselves." So the commentary goes on to say this. There are many points of similarity between this brief excerpt from Havel's speech and the letter of James. Havel writes from the heart, and like James, his is a heart that has known adversity as well as joy. Both are keen observers of human nature. Both are vitally interested in the creation of true community, a community marked by mutual care and interdependent responsibility. In an era in which a sense of personal responsibility seems endangered, Havel calls it true. James also is unafraid to call sin by its true name. And like Havel, he will not allow us to shirk responsibility for our own actions or for the evil that occurs because of our inaction. James wrote to a church beset by a number of problems. These problems included divisiveness, intolerance, favoritism, and the overpowering desire for wealth and status. I want you to think for a second about where we are in our country, and I think that it is no surprise. This is election week. We are very divided. You know, these problems that James spoke to, divisiveness, intolerance, favoritism, the overpowering desire for wealth and status. Does that sound familiar? I know it sounds really familiar to me. And so my hope is that as we explore this amazing book, that we in our own hearts will not just look around, as Havel says, to the rest of the world and the rest of society and point fingers, but we can actually look into our own hearts and see where we have fostered intolerance or favoritism or divisiveness, where we have, kind of pushed against people. And my hope is that we can really take a good look at that and replace those things with the love, the mercy, the justice, the humility that God requires. So let's look at James. James is a letter, so it is written in the New Testament. And, one thing I always like to do when I'm starting out a study of a new book is I like to see, like, well, who's he talking to? What's going on? James is a really interesting book because it is, James is the kind of person where if you met him, he would not be afraid to tell you what he thinks about you. Like, he's one of those people that doesn't skirt around the issues. He hits the nail on the head every single time. He's not like me, like I'm kind of like always afraid to say anything. But he is just kind of like straightforward. This is what it is, and this is what we need to do. And I'm thankful for people like James, who you never know, you never wonder what they're thinking. You always kind of know what's going on. But so where James is, straight, a nail on the head, you know what he's thinking, you know what's up with him. It's also a very ambiguous letter because, it's kind of like, it doesn't say, exactly like some of the other letters, like, this is who I am specifically. We all know who Paul was, right? But scholars question, which James is it? Okay, so there's 6 Jameses in the New Testament. So we can question, like, was this James the son of Zebedee? James and John were sons of Zebedee. Is it that James? James, son of Alphaeus? James the father of Judas? Or could it potentially be James the brother of Jesus? And a lot of scholars have kind of concluded, based on when it was written, who it was sent to, who was already dead by the time that they think it was written. They've concluded, not all of them, but many of them have concluded that it's James the brother of Jesus. And so another thing is, James starts out in James 1, and it talks about being to the 12 tribes scattered. Okay, so then we kind of start to think, like, well, who are these 12 tribes, and like, why are they scattered, and all of these different things. And we have to remember that during this time frame when the book of James was written, maybe it's a little bit like now, where we feel like everything is very scattered. The pandemic has kind of pushed us all into our homes. Many of us, have not met with family members or with different people, or we're very cautious about these things. The early Christians were also in this position where, because they were Christians, they were being highly persecuted. They were consistently, not meeting together because they were afraid to, or they actually came up with very specific symbols that they would put on their porches or on the ground outside of their homes or businesses to signify that there's Christians there. And it was a way for them to be able to meet together without getting killed, really, without being sent to prison. And so at this time, the early church was very scattered all over the place. Maybe that's something that we can relate to right now, right? So, this is just a little bit of the background. Over the next couple weeks, I wanted to talk to you about some of the themes that we're going to be going through, and I think that they're very apt for this time frame. I really hope that this book will really be able to teach us a lot. Some of the themes that James includes are suffering. I know that a lot of us feel that way. The coronavirus cases are spiking. Maybe some of you have had it. Maybe some of you have experienced it. And maybe you're afraid for your loved ones, and there's a lot of suffering. People have lost their jobs. People don't know how they're going to make ends meet, and it is very difficult times right now. Sin, and like I said, James hits the nail on the head, and he's not afraid to say it like it is. And my hope is that we can kind of come to that place in our own hearts where we call out the things that we need to change. The idea that the poor are righteous, this is a really interesting one, and I'm looking forward to kind of exploring that with you. Instead of this idea that, like, well, the rich are there because, they've done all the right things, James actually explores the idea that the poor are the ones who are actually righteous, and it's kind of an Old Testament theology that he's looking into. And then living with wisdom. And don't we all need that? And every day I find myself praying more and more for wisdom, because the choices out there are very difficult to make. And, you know, sometimes the right decision is very difficult to ascertain, especially nowadays. And so wisdom is something that I think we can all ask God for at all times. So that's just a little bit of the background on the book of James. Next week, we're going to be looking at actual James 1. And I'm really looking forward to going through this study with you. I hope you were able to kind of learn something. And I encourage you to do your own research and your own studying. And I think this is going to be an awesome series. So thank you guys for listening today. And I hope you have a very blessed week. Please stay safe and know you are loved.